Chapter 25 of The Golden Bough by George Gibbs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tony Oliva. Kempelstein. "Chère Zoya," said Roland in a moment, as he smoked a much-desired cigarette, "this will not do at all. We must never be seen together in these costumes. You look like the front cover of a fashion magazine, and I like a coal miner up for the air. But we haven't any time to lose. In 10 minutes the Sleeping Beauty will roll into the Bahnhof at Lindau, waiting for someone to wake him with a kiss. They'll be getting suspicious in 15 minutes, and after that they'll go over this smiling land with a fine-tooth comb, and if there are no teeth out of it, they'll draw something. There's one way." "What, Philip?" "A beeline for the lake." "How far is it?" "Not over a mile or so, I think. You can see the water shimmering through the trees." "Let's go, then." "You're not too tired?" "No. Lead on. I'll follow." He peered out of their place of concealment and walked in a leisurely way along the road. Behind them, at the railroad gate, the old woman still sat knitting. Both trains had gone. The way to the lake was clear, a country road, little traveled. A fresh breeze had started up, and the sun had broken above the low-hanging bands of moisture and laid a pretty pattern of the shimmering foliage along his path. The business of escaping seemed absurdly simple. Only a few miles of water between himself and freedom. But the uncertainty about Tanya and Markov made him grave. Had they received his message last night? And if so, had they heeded it and come on safely to Lindenhof? More ifs came suddenly into his mind than he cared to think about. Markov was clever, and with the hurdy-gurdy could have been counted on to reach Schloss Kempelstein without difficulty. But without the hurdy-gurdy, and surrounded by police and soldiers, all of whom had been notified of his passage across Bavaria, how would he fare? Was he equal to such an emergency? That was the risk. In a moment Roland had proof of the thoroughness with which von Stromberg had done his work, for at the next crossing 2 provincial policemen awaited his approach, scrutinizing him carefully. He nodded to them cheerfully and bade them good morning, but they stood in his path, and he stopped, rather alarmed at the unexpected turn of events. But he kept his easy pose admirably, and his grin disarmed them. "Your name, please?" asked the older man. "With pleasure." Politely. "Leo Knaus." "You are of the railroad?" "Assuredly. Do I not look black enough?" "Quite so. Where do you live?" "In Kempten." "Where do you go now?" Roland laughed. "To the lake, for a bath. You would like to do the same if you had spent the night upon my locomotive." Here the younger man broke in. "The man described has gray hair. As you will see, that of Herr Knaus is black." "Aye, and his skin, too," laughed Roland, and then, "You were looking for someone?" "A tall man with gray hair, and a girl whose hair is reddish-brown. You did not see by chance upon the road a hurdy-gurdy, a piano organ on wheels drawn by a small donkey?" "I am a fireman. There is no time to examine the scenery. But wait." Roland took off his cap and scratched his head. "A hurdy-gurdy, you say? With a donkey?" Yes, you've seen?" I'm sure. Yesterday, near Immenstadt. A donkey. A very small donkey?" "Yes, a small donkey, and a man and woman walking." "At dusk last night, where the railroad and the highway ran parallel near the lake of Immenstadt. I am sure. There is no grade there, and I was resting, leaning against the side of my coal box. My engineer, Duveneck, that does not matter. You are sure of what you tell?" "Positive." "You will report to the Weissenburg station when you have had your bath?" "Assuredly. My engine is there. I go on duty this afternoon." "Good." At this moment Zoya Rochal came up to the group and, staring blankly, passed on. "Reddish hair," repeated the older man. "Of course I could not see the color of the woman's hair. We will see to this at once. The telegraph, Nussbaum." And off they went, traveling back along the road by which Roland had come. With a grin he watched them depart on their wild goose chase. Immenstadt was east, Weingarten west. "And never the twain shall meet," he quoted cheerfully to himself, aware of the fact that not yet had the net been closed around Markoff and Tanya, and he, Roland, had perhaps widened its mouth by 50 miles or so. But such expedients were dangerous and made the necessity for his disappearance and Zoya's from the immediate neighborhood a matter of great urgency. He went on toward the lake, following Zoya Rochal, compelling his feet to move slowly, while every impulse urged speed. Already sleeping, von Stromberg must have been discovered, and it would not be many minutes before the alarm would go out for Zoya Rochal. Her trim, dark figure moved steadily in front of him 100 yards away, slowly reducing the distance to the water, which Roland could now see at the foot of the lane. There were boats there. He could see them clearly now, boats of all kinds. Zoya seemed to move more slowly, more painfully. She was tired out. He hurried forward and passed her. "Courage," he whispered. "We are not suspected. Can you go on?" She was very pale. Yes, a little faint." "Courage," he repeated. He strode on more rapidly now, passing through a village of small frame houses of the poorer sort, reaching the foot of the lane where there was a jetty, beyond which several sailboats were anchored. There was an old man on the jetty, cleaning some fish which he had taken out of a sailboat alongside. Roland lighted a cigarette and approached him leisurely. "Good luck?" he asked. The man looked up with the taciturnity of fishermen. "Fair," he said. "Any boats to hire?" The man looked Roland over from top to toe, his fish knife suspended in the air. "You don't think I can pay because I am a workman. I am off for a holiday, my friend. See?" And Roland exhibited 100-mark note with an air of great pride. The fisherman became more interested at once, but shook his head. "There is a new law about renting boats to strangers. You must have a pass from the officer commanding at Lindau." Roland laughed. "Strangers! That's pretty good. And me working between Weissenburg and Kempten for 10 years." The fisherman rose and took up his bucket of fish. "I'm sorry. Your money is as good as anyone else's, but it can't be done." Roland looked around him quickly. There was no one in sight upon the shore, and only the slender figure of Zoya Rochal slowly approaching him along the jetty. Alongside the raft to which the man had descended to wash his fish was the sailboat he had used. The breeze was fresh, and from the south. The boom swung noisily to and fro. Roland's mind was working rapidly. Zoya joined him. "Courage," he whispered. "Go down." She obeyed him, descending the wooden steps to the lower level. The fisherman looked up indifferently and rose, his fish strung. "You're sure you don't want to change your mind?" asked Roland pleasantly. "No, it is verboten." "Is this your boat?" "Yes, but—" 100 marks, Herr Fisherman," said Roland, bringing the money out and holding it before the man's eyes again. The man dropped his fish and scowled at Roland. "Donnerwetter! Have I not said—" There was no time to waste. Roland had put both their necks into a noose which this idiot would draw if they parleyed longer. "Get in the sailboat, Zoya," he said coolly, and the bewildered fisherman watched her obey. "Your money—" "My boat!" the man shouted, rushing forward. but he got no further, for Roland shoved him violently, tripping him skillfully at the same time, and he disappeared into the water. Zoya was already in the boat, and before the fisherman came to the surface, Roland had cast off the bowline and pushed away from the raft. The fellow rose, sputtering, and tried to clamber in, but found himself looking into the barrel of Roland's automatic. "Herrgott!" the fellow muttered, and dropped back into the water. By this time the sailboat had swung off from the dock. Roland hauled in the sheet, pulled up the lug sail, and a quick twist of the tiller sent her on her way. "Silly fool," said Roland half to himself. "He's merely out 100 marks." The craft heeled over, and the foam rushed out from under her counter, bubbling aft in a manner most cheerful to see. But before Roland had worked clear of the other boats at anchor, he heard a sound behind him, and looking over his shoulder, saw the drenched figure of his friend, the fisherman, rushing along the jetty, shouting like a demon. Figures emerged along the shore and stood watching curiously, and when the man reached them and told his story, there was a good deal of running around and waving of arms, but the thing that interested Roland most was the fact that while he looked, no one ran out on the jetty or toward the rowboats. They may have disliked the taciturn fisherman, as Roland had done, or they may have thought that he dreamed. "There may be a telephone in that dump," grinned Roland, "but I'll risk 100 marks on it." Meanwhile he steered for the open lake, sure that the rule against the use of petrol which applied to motor cars would also apply to power boats. For the present at least they were safe, and skimming along under a quartering breeze which showed no signs of diminishing. Zoya sat rigidly upon the hard bench, her gaze on the town of Lindau, which, separated from the mainland by a bridge, seemed to be slowly rising from the water. "He is there," she said with a shudder. "Imagine when he wakes. Phew, the guard, poor devil." And then joyously, "Zoya, we've beaten them." "Yes, the gods are good." "Do you feel better?" "Better, yes, but I am very tired." "Will you lie down yonder and try to rest?" "Yes, Philippe." She was very submissive. He covered her with his coat, and she thanked him softly. But again he noticed the air of indifference, of restraint, of passive acceptance of the new relationship between them. The breeze was life-giving, and the craft, which bore the name of Elsa, seemed as deeply imbued as Roland with the exigencies of the occasion, for as the breeze freshened she leaped joyously toward the distant shore, as though aware of an important mission which had nothing to do with trout or Ferchen. Roland steered wide of all other craft. Fishermen's boats returning to Lindau, a steamer just leaving the Hafen for Rorschach, and having covered, as he thought, a sufficient distance from his point of departure, swung in again toward the Bavarian shore. Markoff had described Schloss Kempelstein to him, a solitary tower upon the shore of the lake, west of Lindau. There was a small jetty, too, with boats. Such a place should not be difficult to find. He searched the shore with his gaze and found a tower, much nearer Lindau than he had supposed. At the sudden change in the motion of the Elsa, coming around on the other tack, Zoya Rochal started up and looked at the rapidly approaching shore. "It seems a pity," she said quietly. He understood her, but answered cheerfully enough. "We'll come through, Zoya, don't worry." "It's death this time, Philippe." "Well," he laughed, "we'll go merrily. There's only one thing I regret." "What, Philippe?" "That I didn't tickle His Excellency under the chin." "I hope he doesn't tickle us under ours, mon vieux," she said rather grimly. The tower of Schloss Kempelstein grew in height, and now the ruined walls surrounding it appeared. There was a sailboat moored alongside the jetty, and one or two small boats drawn up on the shore by the tower. Roland watched the place eagerly, and the Elsa rushed on, her bows dipping heavily into the cross seas, drenching them both with foam. Zoya leaned forward, her hands clasped over the gunwale, pale, calm, indifferent to her discomfort, her wide, weary gaze fixed like Roland's on the jetty beside the tower. There was an arch which connected the tower with a ruined building alongside, and it was in the shadow of this arch that they were both suddenly aware of figures moving, 2 men and 2 women. The Elsa was still too far away for them to distinguish faces, but the figures stood for a moment as though in conversation, and then seemed to move toward the jetty. Behind the ruin, upon what seemed to be a high road, there were men on horseback, riding in a cloud of dust. "There's something going on, Zoya," whispered Roland tensely. "What does this mean?" The Elsa was now rushing in headlong. Roland was so eager to shorten the distance that he had taken no account of the possible dangers of the beach or the necessities of a safe landing. But he put the helm up now and let the craft swing down the beach 100 yards or so, while he watched the figures on the pier, now plainly distinguishable. One of the women was Tanya Korasoff, the other woman. Roland stared in astonishment. It was no woman, but a monk in a belted robe, and while Roland and Zoya looked, they saw the monk direct Tanya to the sailboat alongside the jetty. There was a shout from the men in the shadow of the arch as they rushed out toward the figure of the monk. As they emerged into the sunlight, the monk raised an arm, gesturing, and then there was a loud report, and one of the men under the arch seemed to stumble and fall. Then they saw him half rise and crawl on toward the monk. Another report, and the crawling man sank to the ground and moved no more. The other man hesitated and then ran back to the shadow of the arch. "Good old Markov!" shouted Roland. "The monk is Markov, Zoya." And then again wildly, "The boat!" he shouted to the monk. "They're coming, Markov, behind you, from the road." Zoya had started up at the beginning as the shots were fired, and had leaned forward, her eyes peering in horror. "That's not Markov," she whispered now to Roland. "Not Markov," she repeated. "It was he, yonder." She sank down upon the seat and buried her head in her hands. "Not Markov," he muttered. "Then who?" An inkling of the truth came into Roland's mind at the same moment, for the man in the monk's robes turned, and catching up a bag that lay beside him upon the jetty, caught Tanya by the arm, helped her abruptly into the boat, and pushed off from the jetty, just as the cavalcade of horsemen rode through the arch. Roland saw them dismount and rush forward upon the jetty, but the boat had swung off, and her sail had caught the breeze, so that by the time the men in uniform had reached the end of the jetty, there was 30 feet of clear water, quickly widening between them. The soldiers shouted, and one of them drew a revolver, but the man in the monk's robes had leveled his weapon again and fired. Roland was now near enough to see quite clearly the features of the monk. Even without a mustache, Roland recognized the man who had done the shooting, Gregory Hochwald. The Elsa was now working up close-hauled under the lee of the other sailboat, which was making for the open waters of the lake. The soldier kneeled, and Hochwald pushed Tanya down below the gunwale. The automatic of the soldier spoke again and again, but without effect, for Roland saw Hochwald rise in his place and make a derisive gesture. The other soldiers fired also, but the bullets spattered harmlessly in the water. Herr Hochwald had been so busily engaged in making his escape that he had not been aware of the Elsa, which had come up under his lee not 100 meters away. But as he set his course for the open water, he glanced over his shoulder at the Elsa, where Roland, crouched at the tiller, was slowly overhauling him. Roland saw him laugh and say something to Tanya, who straightened, her white face gazing across the space of water at Roland, but without recognition. Zoya lay face downwards upon the seat, silent and motionless. Roland crouched lower, his cap pulled over his eyes. The meaning of the events upon the wharf had come to him slowly, and not until he had seen Hochwald's face did he realize what this escape meant to him and to Tanya. But having grasped the facts, he planned quickly. For the present at least their common foe was baffled, and every mile that grew between the boats and the Bavarian shore was so much to the credit of them both, in a defensive alliance which should not in the least cloud the personal issue between Roland and Hochwald. There was going to be a reckoning of some sort presently, when they reached the center of the lake, a reckoning which would balance all grievances. Roland had suddenly become quite calmly exhilarated, and Zoya raised her head and looked at him in pallid astonishment. As her look questioned, he answered, "It's Hochwald, Zoya. The priest is Hochwald." And as she straightened to look, "Keep down, below the gunwale. He doesn't know. We're going to surprise him." "What are you going to do?" "Oh, just trail along." He was silent again, thinking, and she questioned no more. Indeed, from the look of her, she was more dead than alive, and Roland found time to wonder how she had managed to keep up for so long. He marveled at the look of sudden terror that had come into her face when Matthias Markoff had fallen. It had been as though suddenly, in that dreadful moment, she had had a vision of the ghosts of her sins against him. Poor Markoff. But the memory of Tanya's frightened face in Herr Hochwald's boat soon blotted all else from Roland's mind. Tanya there with his arch-enemy Hochwald, escaping to freedom and Switzerland, with Tanya and the treasure of Nemi. What chance could have thrown them together? For nothing but chance could have aided Hochwald where such a man as von Stromberg had failed. Chance should not avail him now. The Elsa was Nemesis, and she seemed to be aware of it, for she outfooted the heavy craft of Hochwald 3-2. But Roland was not ready to come up with Hochwald yet, not until they had passed the middle of the lake and were safely over the Swiss line. So he eased the Elsa up into the wind and let her hang there from time to time until a mile or two had been covered, when he hauled his lug sail as close as he could, and crossing the stern of Hochwald's boat, stole up the windward, where he kept the Elsa's sail between Hochwald and himself. Roland could now see that Hochwald was puzzled by the actions of this other boat, which clung to him so closely and tried to come closer up into the wind. But Roland edged away, all the while forging ahead, and choosing a position which would give him the advantage when they came to terms. The wind was now blowing half a gale from the mountains to the southward, and the heavy clouds which had formed above their peaks came rolling down, deeper and deeper in shadow, as a presage of more wind to come. But the Elsa was a good sea-boat, and had so far shipped little but the crests of foam. Zoya sat upon the seat, leaning on one elbow, her eyes dully watching the race. From time to time she turned and glanced at Roland, who smiled at her encouragingly, but said nothing. The German shore was now hardly distinguishable through the mists of flying spume and shadow. There was a steamer in the direction of Lindau. Roland had marked her for the last 10 minutes, and she was coming fast, traveling under forced draft, for from time to time her stack belched clouds of black smoke. And now there was a deep boom which rolled with sullen reverberations across the water, and at the same moment, almost, a column of spray shot up in the air 200 yards to the Elsa's left. Zoya started upright and glanced at Roland, who knew what this new danger meant. "The patrol boat, Zoya," he said coolly. "Somebody's given our show away." "Will they catch us?" "I hope not. A stern chase, and we're legging it pretty fast." "It's von Stromberg," she said with the abstracted air of the fatalist. "One cannot get the best of the game with von Stromberg." "We shall," cried Roland triumphantly. "Look, Zoya, the Swiss patrol." She followed the direction of his arm and saw, stealing out from the Hafen of Romanshorn over their starboard bow, another steamer of about the same size as their pursuer. There was no time to spare if Roland's argument with Herr Hochwald was to be concluded before the interesting conflict of these new forces. Another distant boom, and another geyser of water shot into the air, 100 feet nearer. "Can you sail a boat, Zoya?" he asked of her. "No, but I'm willing to try," she said with a strange smile. Roland brought the Elsa up into the wind and held her there until the boat of Herr Hochwald drew up on even terms. Then he eased up the helm and steered a course that would bring the two boats together in a few moments. He saw Hochwald, who had by this time thrown off his monk's robe, rise in the stern of the other boat and scrutinize him eagerly, his sail meanwhile flapping uncertainly. But the Elsa bore down on him like an avenging angel until only a few yards of water separated the two boats. By this time Hochwald, who had guessed that the actions of the Elsa boded him no good, had put his helm up to run for it. But Roland, his cap pulled well down over his eyes, maneuvered skillfully and brought the Elsa alongside. And there they rushed for a second or so, crashing together, the foam dashing over them, the white water flashing between. "Quick, Zoya!" cried Roland. "Hold her, as she is." And leaving the helm, he dashed forward, seizing the Elsa's bowline, leaped into the air safely, and took a quick turn of the painter around the mast of Hochwald's boat. Hochwald had recognized him now, and began firing as Roland saw Tanya rise from the bottom of the boat where she had been lying. "Keep down, Tanya!" he cried triumphantly in the voice that she knew so well. "It's I, Philippe." Illustration: "Keep down, Tanya," he cried. "It's I, Philippe." She obeyed him in a fascination of surprise and terror, saw Zoya Rochal clamber from one boat to the other and rise, heard the reports of firearms, saw Zoya's eyes widen, saw her clutch at her breast and, stumbling, fall just behind Philippe, who had run aft toward Hochwald, firing as he went. Tanya hid her face in her hands for a second, then rose, watching the two men swaying in a deadly embrace. There was another shot from Hochwald's weapon, muffled against the body of Philippe, but he still struck and struggled, lifting Hochwald clear of the gunwale. As Tanya ran aft, Roland fell half over the side, while Hochwald hung a moment, his face ghastly, feebly gripping for a hold, and then disappeared in the green swirl of water astern. Tanya caught at Roland's shoulder and hauled him back into the boat, and he sank into her arms, the smile still on his lips, a smile that now twitched painfully, for upon his soaking shirt above the breast was a dark spot, spreading rapidly. "Tanya," he was muttering, "cast off. Other boat. Steer. Swiss patrol." And then his head fell forward, and he was silent. She gazed at him in anguish, but laid him gently down and ran quickly forward. The boats were thrashing together dangerously, and the other was half full of water. With difficulty she cast off the line. Zoya lay upon it, but at last she got it free, and ran back to Philippe, who was lying where she had laid him, the water in the cockpit washing over him. She sat beside the tiller, raising his head in her lap, trying with her handkerchief to staunch the flow of blood from his wound. Was it to be death after all? Steer. Swiss patrol. She caught at the sheet beside her. That Hochwald had pulled and fastened to the cleat. A huge wave came over the bow and frightened her, but she grasped the tiller and headed toward the Swiss shore. The Swiss patrol boat loomed larger, but the other, the German boat, still came on, a white cataract at its bows. She did not seem to care now. The rush of the waves, of the growing storm, roared in her ears as though from a great distance. Before her, out of the gray of the mist and rain, came the loom of the shore. She heard the hails of men. They seemed to be all about her, but she knew not how to obey, and only sat clinging to the tiller and to Roland, whose head was against her body, very pale and still. She was aware of a boat alongside of her, manned by men in smart uniforms, one of whom leaped over into her boat, gave one quick glance around, and then at first gently and then with more force released the tiller from her hand. "If the Fräulein will permit," a voice said. "You are Lieutenant Hofmeyer of the Swiss Lake Patrol." She raised her head blankly, staring at him, and then, as he caught her in his arms, suddenly relaxed. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Golden Bough by George Gibbs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tony Oliva. Finis. The navy of land-locked Switzerland has always been a subject for jest among nations that go down to the sea in ships. But the patrol service of Lake Constance, which guards the line running midway down the length of the lake against illegality, the smuggling of arms and ammunition, the use of improper passports, and all the illicit dealings that are a part of the secret operations of nations at war, has been and continues to be a highly efficient force in the preservation of neutral relations. Herr Lieutenant Hofmeyer, no lover, in spite of his name, of methods Teutonic, took as great a pride in his craft as though she had been a 20,000-ton battleship, as much joy in his 2 small deck rifles as though they had been 38 centimeters in caliber. It was his business to watch the lake for signs of suspicious craft, and especially to note the movement of the German government vessels at Lindau and Friedrichshafen, so that when the German patrol emerged from Lindau, vomiting black smoke, he came out at once, assured that the 2 small fishing boats that he had been watching for some moments crossing in the storm were the objects of German attention. The round shots sent as warning aroused him to greater interest, especially as now it was clear that the sailboats had reached Swiss waters, over which Herr Lieutenant Hofmeyer had dominion. He was somewhat jealous of his authority, and found himself growing warm as the firing proceeded, quite in contravention of international agreements. And so, just to show that he was on the job, and not lightly to be considered, he had his bow gun cast loose and fired one shot well to windward of the pursuing boat. The sailboats were now easily visible to the Herr Lieutenant with the naked eye, and he noted with amazement the crashing of the 2 boats together, the reports of firearms, and the fight that followed, in which one man had gone overboard. And so, when he got within hailing distance, he shouted to the occupants of one sailboat, which had now swung clear, but got no answer. So he gave several quick orders, and when his vessel lost way, jumped into his gig, which was swung overside, and pulled rapidly to the badly sailing lugger. There was a girl at the helm, a very beautiful girl with reddish-brown hair, who looked at him blankly and refused to relinquish the helm. She was bewildered and terrified, and, after a brief question, fainted in his arms. In the bottom of the boat at her feet a man lay, bleeding from a wound in his body, and forward, in the wash of the water the boat had shipped, another woman, dead. The Herr Lieutenant took the helm and brought the lugger alongside the gangway of his craft, where, with the help of his gig crew, the unconscious girl, the wounded man, and the dead woman were carried upon deck, his boatswain also bringing up from the lugger a black robe and a large valise which weighed heavily. Lieutenant Hofmeyer gave some brief orders, a restorative for the girl, first aid for the wounded man, who, though desperately hurt, had a chance for life, then mounted his bridge and took down his megaphone, for the German patrol boat had drawn up within a cable's length and was now lowering a boat to come aboard him. "I would inform you, Herr Lieutenant, that you have already violated neutrality by firing over my line," he roared. He spoke of the international boundary with the casual air of possession that was habitual with him. "Escaping spies," came the reply. "We are within our rights." "You have no rights in Swiss territory," he snapped, and lowered the megaphone, for his boatswain had mounted the bridge beside him and saluted. "The lady has come to, sir, and would like to speak to you at once." "Very good. Take the deck and receive the Herr Lieutenant. I will return." And with a glance at the approaching boat, he went below. Tanya was sitting up among some pillows on a bench in the cabin. She was very pale, her skin, transparent like onyx, blue-veined, her gray eyes dark and luminous. "You wanted to see me?" asked the lieutenant with brisk politeness. "Yes, Herr Hofmeyer." "Herr Hofmeyer, I plead with you that you do not give us up. I am a Russian, the wounded man an American. We claim the protection of Swiss neutrality." "The German captain claims that you are spies." "It is not true. I was taken into Germany against my will by the man who was drowned, an agent of the German government, with the money in the valise yonder, which we have recovered." And breathlessly, in as few words as possible, she told him her story. He listened attentively, aware of the fact that his captive was struggling bravely against her weakness, against terror of the horrors through which she had passed. In the midst of their conversation a sailor entered, touching his cap. "Herr Lieutenant Zapp of the Bodensee Patrol and His Excellency General Graf von Stromberg." Tanya stared past the man toward the door of the cabin as though expecting to see the terrible old man following the messenger. "Herr Hofmeyer," she pleaded, "his power is without limit. It is death for me." Hofmeyer turned and dismissed the man. "I will be on deck in a moment." And then to Tanya gently, "You are no spy?" "No, I swear it." "Nor he, the American?" "Nor he. That also I swear." He caught the hands she extended toward him and pressed them firmly. "That's all I want to know. Fear nothing. Even the German Emperor has no dominion over me." "You will not let them?" "No. Be at rest." And with a smile he vanished through the door and went up on deck, walking straight to where the two visitors awaited him, then halting, saluted. After formal introductions, General von Stromberg smiled. "It was most kind of you, Herr Lieutenant Hofmeyer. We are thankful for your assistance. We have come to relieve you of our prisoners." "Bitte?" said Hofmeyer. "Our prisoners," repeated von Stromberg. "We have come for them." "There is doubtless some misunderstanding," said the Swiss officer politely. "I have no prisoners of yours, as Herr Lieutenant Zapp will doubtless tell you." "Come, Herr Lieutenant," broke in von Stromberg. "We do not wish to delay you, or indeed to be delayed. Our time is short." "And mine. I have a patient who must go to the hospital at once." "And you have the temerity to say that you will not relinquish these prisoners to me?" Hofmeyer bowed. "You have not mistaken my meaning." "And you are willing to accept the consequences of this action?" "Beyond doubt, or I would not take it." Von Stromberg turned to his companion. "Herr Lieutenant Zapp, it cannot be that this gentleman is aware of my power, my authority." "You are mistaken," broke in the Swiss quite coolly. "You are Herr General Graf von Stromberg, head of the military sections of the Imperial German Secret Service, Geheimrat, Privy Councillor of His Majesty Emperor William II." He took 2 steps toward the brass rail and pointed. "But your power, your authority ends yonder, a mile away. If you are unfamiliar with the treaties, with the law which governs the Bodensee, Herr Lieutenant Sapp will doubtless enlighten you on your way back to Lindau." "You are impudent, sir." "I am merely obedient to those who command me." "Those who command you shall command your dismissal." "This is not Prussia, Excellency." "Not while I do my duty." Von Stromberg glared at the boy as though he would have liked to strangle him. "Do you realize that the money which these prisoners have looted belongs to citizens of Germany?" "That is a matter which the courts will determine," said the Swiss lightly. Von Stromberg shrugged and laughed unpleasantly. "You are a very foolish young man." Then, after a moment of hesitation, he took a pace forward, catching Hofmeyer by the arm and walking a few paces along the deck with him, whispering. In the midst of the conversation the Swiss suddenly flung away. "Bribery!" he cried hotly. "You've found the wrong man, Excellency. I will give you 1 minute to leave my ship, or I will take you to Switzerland and intern you." And walking to the gangway he pointed down to where the visiting boat lay, the men at their oars. "Your boat awaits you, Herr Lieutenant Sapp. I bid you good morning, Excellency." Von Stromberg scowled, bit his lip and scowled again, but he followed his lieutenant down the ladder and silently entered the boat, wrapping himself in his great cape, and was rowed away. Lieutenant Hofmeyer mounted to the bridge and gave the orders for full speed ahead. Then he leaned over the rail and watched the small craft approach the German patrol boat. "Sacred pig of a Prussian bully! On my own quarterdeck, too! Tish!" And he spat to leeward. For 3 weeks Roland had lain in the hospital at Rorschach, unaware of the storm that had raged about his bed. For a week he had been between life and death, for the bullet of Herr Hochwald had passed through his right lung and embedded itself between the ribs at his side. But careful nursing and the ministrations of an excellent surgeon had pulled him through, and the danger point had long since passed. Modern firearms, unless they kill outright, are not necessarily fatal, and modern surgery, almost an exact science, is on the side of strong constitutions. And so Roland, the bullet removed, was now convalescent, sitting in a wonderful armchair by a sunny window, looking out across the lake that had come so near being his grave, toward the Bavarian shore, where in the distance he could just see the dim outlines of the island of Lindau rising from the water. Tanya had been to see him twice, Shestov once, each for a few moments only, in the presence of his nurse, and yesterday Tanya had told him that all was going well, that influence had been brought to bear at Berne by Shestov, Barthou, and the Swiss councillors of Nemi, and that the money of the society which he had fought so hard to bring back was in the way of being restored to its rightful trustees. Tanya was coming to visit him again this morning, and he had been promised a half-hour with her alone. Thus it was that the sun of the morning seemed so bright, and the cloud-flecked sky so blue. Also he had shaved and was conscious of a supreme sense of well-being. She came to him all in white, as became a bride, looking extraordinarily handsome, radiant with happiness and glowing with the joy of his recovery. The nurse, who was a discreet person, smiled at them both and withdrew. He held out his arms, and without a word she came into them, kneeling. "Philippe," she murmured, "you are sure that you are getting well? It seems—" "Right as rain. The cough has stopped. In a week I'll be as strong as ever. And then—" He paused, and she raised her lips to his, flushing adorably. "And then—" She knew what he wanted to say, but she wanted him to say it. You and I, Tanya, my wife." "Whenever you wish, Philippe Roland," she murmured. "Today?" he urged. "Whenever you wish. We have one life together." He was silent in a moment of soberness. "We have a great work to do, Tanya." "Yes, we shall do it. Together. Russia." Her voice sank. "Oh, mon Philippe, my country. The cause seems so hopeless. Anarchy. Nothing less." "Order will follow. Reason. Regeneration." "Honor cannot come from dishonor. Russia is false. A Judas among the nations." Roland laughed. "Cheer up, my princess. Wave your wand, and all will yet be well." "My wand! A reed, Philippe. Broken. I have never felt so weak, so powerless." "But never have you been so strong. For in you I have already found new strength, new power, authority. But there must be no more medievalism in Nemi, Tanya. I have been thinking much. I have learned something in Germany. We must make a new fight for the people yonder. They are not ready yet, but soon, soon. In the meanwhile we can work secretly. Our giant with 100 arms has only been groping in the darkness, but he has a giant's strength. He shall use it. If you and I alone against von Stromberg, all Germany, can emerge victorious, we can win again and again. We have given the first blow and are unharmed. There are rumors of strikes, you have heard? There will be other strikes, more bloodshed, until the people of Germany arise in their might. A dream, perhaps, but it is a good dream for France, for England, and America. But of one thing I am resolved, that the society of Nemi shall not pass into the hands of the enemies of our allies." "God forbid, Hochwald." "Others will come, like him, from Russia, from Germany, but they shall not win, for we will know them." "But if you are interned—" "They know nothing of my service in the French army. I shall not tell them. Barthou hopes for my full freedom." "I was almost hoping—" She paused and pressed his hand gently. "What?" "That they would intern you. I am afraid of danger now, Philippe. I never was before. The legend—" "There shall be no more legends." He laughed, kissing her hands gently. "And yet, after all, was it not a legend that brought me Princess Tatiana?" "But she is here to guard you against danger, Philippe Roland. Death seems to me so much the more terrible, now that life and happiness stretch before us both. Poor Zoya!" "And Markov. But they went together, as he would have wished." She hid her face in her hands. "Together? Yes. I can never forget him. Never." "Nor I." "She loved you, Philippe," she whispered. He was silent, thinking, and then, "She did what she could to atone. One is judged, I think, by one's whole life, Tanya, not a part of it. Her record is finished, but its last item is the most important. She paid in blood," he finished soberly. "And Grisha Kodkina, he too." Roland shrugged. "He was game," he muttered. She took from her handbag some papers, much wrinkled, soiled, and water-stained. "His dossier." "We'll hardly need it now." He caught her hands in his, and the papers fell to the floor. Papers once so significant, and now merely soiled papers. "We have now this moment, Tanya. Let us forget everything else. Later we will give for others. Now we will take for ourselves." "It is too wonderful to be true." "Like the fairy tale. Listen, and I will tell it to you. Once upon a time there was a very small boy who lived in a very large house in a very noisy city. and there came to him in his dreams a wonderful fairy, who carried a wand with a star at its end, which had the property of making all good things come true. Her name was Princess Tatiana, and he loved her, for she was very, very beautiful. Tanya laid her fingers across his lips. "Is not our own fairy story more beautiful than this?" He kissed her fingers, and then, since her lips were near, took them too, for fairy tales, beautiful as they may be, are, after all, mere creatures of dreams, and Tanya's lips were very real. The End. End of chapter 26. End of The Golden Bough by George Gibbs.